My name is Petra. I am 31 years old, and I have spent the better part of the last 2 years understanding the difference between being loved by your family and being used by them. Those two things can look nearly identical from the outside. From the inside, the difference is everything. I live on the fourth floor of a building that smells like radiator heat and on Thursdays, someone else's garlic bread. My apartment has 2 bedrooms, one I sleep in and one I use as an office, and a kitchen window that faces east, which means I get the morning light in a way that makes even November look generous if you catch it at the right angle. I have lived here for 4 years. I chose it the way I have tried to choose everything in my adult life, deliberately after thinking it through, without consulting people who would have opinions about it that had more to do with their own preferences than my situation. I have a job I spent 7 years building. I am a regional compliance officer for a logistics firm that operates 14 distribution hubs across 3 states.
I know that sounds dry.
What it means in practice is that I rebuilt a department that had been running on improvisation and goodwill since 2014, identified $347,000 in annual regulatory exposure that nobody had thought to audit, hired 2 analysts, and turned a function that had been treated as an afterthought into something the company's general counsel actually calls before making decisions. I started at that company as a coordinator making $41,000 a year. I am not making $41,000 a year anymore. I tell you this because the story I am about to tell you is, in part, about what my family decided to do with a life they had not built and had never been asked to consult on. I have a plant on my windowsill named Gerald. He is a pothose. He has survived 3 years of my inconsistent watering schedule and 2 apartment temperature swings, and a period in 2022 when I forgot about him for 3 weeks while I was managing a compliance audit, and he simply waited, quietly on the sill. Gerald is a better roommate than most people I have met. I tell you all of this because I need you to understand what I had before I tell you what my family tried to take from me without asking. My brother Declan is 34 years old. He is 2.5 years older than me, which means he spent those 2.5 years being the child my parents measure me against. And then somewhere around age 17 the trajectory shifted, and I became the one they measured him against, and neither of us asked for either arrangement. Declan is charming in the way that certain people are charming, immediately, warmly, with a quality of attention that makes you feel, in the moment he is focused on you, like you are the most interesting person in the room. The problem is that this quality does not extend to sustained effort. Declan has started 11 different things in his adult life: jobs, certifications, business ideas. One actual business that lasted 9 months before the LLC was dissolved, and finished approximately 3 of them. My parents have always called this being a free spirit. I have always called it being unwilling to be uncomfortable for long enough to get somewhere. Declan has a son. His name is Marcus, and he is 4.5 years old, and he has his father's dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile he got from his mother, Renee, and an absolute gift for becoming intensely interested in very small things: a particular rock, a specific cloud formation, the way water moves in a puddle when you tap the edge with your shoe. Marcus is one of the genuinely good things that has come out of my family in recent memory, and none of what happened next was his fault. Renee and Declan were together for 3 years. They separated when Marcus was 18 months old. Not dramatically, no affair, no blow-up, just the slow erosion of 2 people who wanted different things and had not figured that out before they had a child together. Renee took a job in a city 40 minutes away. They shared custody. Marcus spent weekdays with his mother and weekends with Declan, which meant, in practice, that Marcus spent weekdays in a stable environment with a woman who had a schedule and a plan, and weekends with a man who loved him enormously and fed him well, and took him to parks and to car shows and to his parents' house for Sunday dinners, and who had not at that point demonstrated any inability to manage the lighter version of parenthood that a weekend custody arrangement requires. Then Renee died. A pulmonary embolism, on a Tuesday in February of last year, at 36 years old. She had no warning symptoms. She was at work. She was gone within the hour. I am not going to describe what happened to our family in the days that followed because grief is not mine to narrate on her behalf, and I did not know her as well as I should have, and I am still sorry about that. What I will tell you is that Marcus moved in with Declan full-time, and that Declan, who had managed the weekend version of fatherhood with warmth and ease, encountered the full-time version, and found it much harder than he had expected, and that this was not surprising to me, though I did not say so out loud, because saying so out loud would have made me the villain of a story in which I was, at that point, simply the worried sister standing in the corner watching. The first time I drove out to Declan's apartment unannounced was in March of last year. It was a Saturday, 10:40 a.m., overcast and cold in the specific way that late winter is cold, not dramatic, just persistent, the kind of gray that has forgotten what it was like to be something else. Declan had not answered 3 calls in a row. That was not, on its own, alarming. Declan is a person who loses his phone in his couch and forgets to charge it and answers texts 3 days after they were sent. But something had been sitting uneasily in me since I had last spoken to him 2 weeks prior, when he had sounded tired in a way that was different from his usual tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper than that. His apartment is a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a complex off the highway, close enough that you can hear traffic from the living room if the windows are open. The building is fine. The landscaping is maintained. There is a playground in the back that Marcus had liked. The last time I had brought him there when he was 2 and could be entertained by a swing for 40 unbroken minutes, while Declan and I drank coffee on a bench nearby and talked about nothing in particular. I knocked. Declan answered after a minute and a half, and he looked like a person who had not been sleeping enough or eating enough or existing in a way that involved much structure. He looked glad to see me. He looked ashamed that he looked glad to see me. The apartment was not filthy. I want to be accurate here because I have told this story to people since, and some of them have added details that were not there, that dramatize it in ways that feel like a betrayal of what I actually saw. The apartment was not filthy. But the kitchen had dishes in the sink that had been there long enough to leave a smell, and the counter had an accumulation of takeout containers and mail and a sippy cup that had rolled against the backsplash, and there was laundry on the couch in that particular state of being neither folded nor abandoned, but just sitting there, occupying the middle space where intention had stalled. Marcus was in his room watching something on a tablet. When I knocked on his door and said his name, he looked up at me with a face that did something complicated to my chest. Not frightened, not distressed, just very still. The way a child looks who has learned, without being told directly, that the adults around him are managing something and that the right thing to do is to be quiet and not add to it. I took Marcus out for ice cream, even though it was 41 degrees. We sat in a booth and he had a chocolate scoop in a cup and told me, in great detail, about a book his preschool teacher had read about a caterpillar. He was very invested in the caterpillar. He told me the caterpillar's name was Barry, even though I am fairly certain the book does not give the caterpillar a name. When I brought him back, I stayed for another hour and helped Declan do the dishes and threw away the takeout containers and said, lightly, casually, in the way you say things to someone you don't want to spook, that I was around if he needed anything and that I could come by on weekends and give him a break sometimes. Declan said that would be great. He said he was just adjusting. He said it had been a hard couple of months, and he was figuring it out. I drove home that night and called an attorney named Andrea Sutton, whose card I had from a landlord-tenant dispute 2 years earlier, because she had struck me then as the kind of person who understood both the legal and the human dimensions of a problem without collapsing them into each other. I told her I had a nephew in a household I was worried about, and I wanted to understand what options existed. She was not alarmed. She was informative. She walked me through the difference between a welfare check and a formal CPS referral, between voluntary kinship care and court-ordered placement, between a parent who is struggling and a parent whose struggles have crossed into something the state has an interest in. She asked me specific questions. I answered them as accurately as I could. We spoke for 43 minutes and I took 3 pages of notes in the spiral notebook I keep on my desk for things that feel important. I did not call CPS in March. Declan steadied, a little. He picked up part-time work at a hardware distributor in April, $17.40 an hour, 26 hours a week, and while that was not close to enough money to manage his rent and his bills and the cost of full-time childcare, it was something, and something has a different emotional weight than nothing. I started coming by on Saturday afternoons. I brought groceries when I came, nothing dramatic, just the practical things, pasta and cereal and fruit and the specific brand of juice Marcus liked in the little boxes with the cartoon on them. I kept Andrea Sutton's number in my phone under a contact I called Legal Notes, because I had learned by then that information is best kept quiet until the moment it becomes necessary. By July, the part-time job was gone. Declan told my father it was a layoff. I do not know with certainty whether that was true. By September, he had cycled through 2 more positions, one at a call center, one doing deliveries, and neither had lasted more than 6 weeks. And on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of September, at 4:37 p.m., I arrived at his apartment unannounced again and found Marcus alone. Marcus was 4 years old. He was sitting on the living room floor with a box of crackers and the tablet, watching a video about construction equipment. The front door had been unlocked. I let myself in when he did not answer my knock after 2 minutes, and he looked up at me and said, "Aunt Pet, did you see the excavator?" and pointed at the screen, and I sat down on the floor next to him and watched the excavator for a few minutes, and then I said, very calmly, "Hey, where's Daddy?" And Marcus said, without looking away from the screen, "He went to get something. He said he'd be right back." Declan returned 47 minutes after I arrived. He smelled like beer. Not strongly, not fall-down drunk, not slurring, just the particular smell of a man who has had 2 or 3 drinks in the middle of the afternoon on a Thursday at a bar somewhere close enough to walk to. He looked at me standing in his living room, and the expression on his face moved through 3 or 4 things in quick succession before settling on something that was trying to look casual and not quite making it.
Hey, he said.
I just ran out for a second. Marcus was alone, I said. I was gone like 20 minutes. 47 minutes, I said. I was here for 47 of them. He didn't say anything to that. Marcus had not looked up from the tablet. I stayed another hour. I helped Marcus have dinner. There was pasta in the cabinet, and I made it, and we ate together, and Marcus talked about the excavator, and a boy in his class named Felix who had a dog. When Marcus was in the bath, I stood in the hallway with Declan, and I said, quietly, that I needed him to understand that I was worried. That I needed him to tell me honestly whether he was managing. He said he was. He said it had been a rough week. He said it would not happen again. I drove home at 8:22 p.m. I sat in my car in my building's parking lot for 19 minutes. Then I went upstairs and I opened the spiral notebook and I wrote down everything: the time I arrived, the time Declan came back, what Marcus said, what I observed, the smell. I recorded a voice memo on my phone describing it in the same terms. I dated both. Then I called Andrea Sutton and I told her what I had seen. "How long have you been keeping notes?" she asked. "Since March," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I think it's time to talk about what comes next." The meeting was called on a Sunday. My father, Raymond Voss, sent a text to the family group chat on a Thursday evening. Sunday, 2 p.m. Important. Be here. That was the entire message. No context. No question mark. No can everyone make it, just a statement of what was going to happen, issued from the person in our family who had always issued such statements and had always, up until that point, had them complied with. My father worked for 26 years managing a regional distribution center. He retired 3 years ago and has spent the intervening time in a state of productive restlessness that expresses itself in yard projects and strong opinions delivered at the dinner table. He is not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that because the story I am telling you is not a story about a cruel man. It is a story about a man who believed, with genuine conviction, that he understood how his family worked and what each member of it was for, and who had organized that belief over decades without checking it against reality. I arrived at my parents' house at 1:53 p.m. My mother, Carla, had set out cookies on the plates she uses when she wants things to look normal and is afraid they won't. She had made coffee. She was doing the thing she does where she moves around the kitchen adjusting things that do not need adjusting, moving the sugar bowl 2 inches to the left, straightening a dish towel, which is how I have always known since I was a child that my mother is anxious about something but has decided not to name it. Declan was already there on the couch, with Marcus on his lap, scrolling his phone. Marcus looked up when I came in and said, "Aunt Pet," and held his arms out, and I crossed the room and picked him up and he put both hands on my face the way he does, framing it, and examined me very seriously, and then he said, "You have a little piece of hair sticking up," and smoothed it down with great care, and I held him for a moment with my chin on top of his head, and I thought, whatever happens in this room in the next hour, I know what I am here for. My father came in from the back porch at 2:07 p.m. He sat in his chair the way he always sits, forearms on his knees, weight forward, the posture of a man who is about to say something and has decided in advance that it is not up for debate. He looked around the room. He said, "Good. Everyone's here." What came next was not a conversation. It was an announcement. He had decided, he said this plainly, without preamble, that Declan needed a period of stability. Time to find consistent work, get himself sorted out, build something sustainable. During this period, Marcus would live with me. I would work remotely, or, if necessary, reduce my hours or apply for a leave of absence. My father estimated the arrangement would last 6 to 9 months. I held Marcus, and I listened to all of it. Marcus had found a button on my cardigan and was working at it with focused attention. "This is what daughters do," my father said. He said it the way he would have said the sun rises in the east. As a fact. As a thing already settled by the nature of things. You have no husband, no children. You have the space and the time. You will figure out the rest. My brother, sitting on the couch 3 feet away from me, nodded. He nodded at the floor. He did not look at me. My mother said, "It won't be forever, Petra." She was looking at the cookie plate. I looked at Marcus. He had gotten the button off. He held it up and showed it to me, enormous with satisfaction. "I need to think about it," I said. My father said, "There is nothing to think about. He is family." Before I tell you what happened after I drove home from that Sunday, I want to ask you something. What does the sky look like where you are right now? Is there light in it, or is it the kind of gray that has settled in and means business? I drove home in gray. November gray, flat and textureless, the sky the color of old concrete. I remember it because I remember thinking that the color matched something I had been feeling for months, not sadness exactly, not anger exactly. Something more like the moment just before a decision, when you can feel the weight of it but haven't yet put it down anywhere. I drove 41 minutes. I parked. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I sat down on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet under the sink, which is not a thing I do regularly but was apparently what my body decided to do, and I stayed there for a while. Gerald was on the windowsill. The afternoon light was doing its November thing through the glass, low and gray, and somehow still present. I thought about my father's face when he said there is nothing to think about. I thought about Marcus holding up that button. Something inside me went very still. Not cold, still. The way a surface goes still after something has moved across it and the movement is finished. I had spent a great deal of my adult life being the member of my family who absorbed things. I had done it when Declan failed out of his first semester of college, and my parents quietly redirected his tuition money, $14,200, which I know because I asked once directly and my mother told me before she realized she'd answered, toward what they called a fresh start that involved a certification program he did not complete. I had done it after my mother's knee surgery in 2021, when she needed someone to drive her to 8 follow-up appointments over 6 weeks and Declan was too busy, and my father did not drive her because he had things, and so I drove 2 hours each way, 8 times, rearranging my own schedule around each one, and when I asked once if someone else could take one of the later appointments, my mother said, "You're just so much better at this than everyone else," as though that were an explanation, rather than a sentence designed to return me to compliance. I had absorbed these things because I was capable, and because capable people in families tend to get assigned the things that need doing, and because I had not yet learned to distinguish between being generous and being taken for granted. I had been learning slowly, for years. But I had not yet finished learning, which is why I was sitting on a kitchen floor instead of having said, in my father's living room, the thing I needed to say. I got up off the floor. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time looking at Gerald. Then I picked up my phone and called Andrea Sutton. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the family meeting. I told her what my father had said, as close to verbatim as I could. I told her about Declan nodding at the floor. I told her about the button. Andrea listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Tell me where your concern for Marcus actually lives right now. Not what your family thinks. You." I said, "He was alone in that apartment for 47 minutes while his father was at a bar. His father has not held a job for more than 6 weeks since April. I have been inside that apartment 9 times since March, and I have notes from all 9 visits, and the trajectory is not improving. My concern for Marcus is that a 6 to 9 month informal arrangement, where I have no legal standing and no documented authority, and which exists only because my father announced it on a Sunday afternoon, does nothing to protect him in any formal sense. If Declan decides next month to move or to refuse access or to simply stop returning my calls, I have nothing. I have goodwill. Goodwill is not a document, Andrea said. No, it isn't. There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Here is what I want you to understand. A welfare referral is not a punitive act. It is not about punishing Declan. It is about creating a formal assessment of the child's situation, conducted by people whose job is to do that assessment, who are trained to distinguish between a parent who is struggling temporarily and a household that represents ongoing risk. If everything is fine, the assessment says so, and you have your answer. If it is not fine, you have a process, a real one, with standing and structure and legal force, rather than a Sunday afternoon announcement." I said, "What about Marcus? If they determine removal is necessary." "They almost never remove immediately in a case like this," she said. "What they typically do, in a household like what you're describing, struggling parent, documented concern, no acute emergency, is establish a support plan. Conditions, visits, mandatory services. And they will ask for a kinship contact, someone to be named as the first point of call if the household fails to meet the conditions." "That could be me," I said. "With proper paperwork," she said. "Yes. That would be you with legal standing. Not you because your father said so at a dinner table." I sat at my kitchen table for another few minutes after we finished talking. I looked at Gerald. I looked at the low gray November light coming through the window. I thought about Marcus on my lap with the button. "Okay," I said to the empty kitchen. "Okay." Then I called Andrea back and told her I was ready. She filed the welfare referral on Monday, November 9th, at 10:15 in the morning. The caseworker assigned was a woman named Gloria Tran, who conducted an unannounced visit to Declan's apartment on Wednesday, November 11th, at 2:30 p.m. Andrea texted me when the visit was confirmed. I was in a meeting at work reviewing a compliance audit timeline, and I excused myself to the hallway and read the text, and stood there for a moment, and then I went back into the meeting. I did not call my father. I did not call Declan. I went to work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I made my deadlines. I had dinner on Wednesday evening, pasta, standing at my counter, and watched something on television, and went to bed at 10:47 p.m. and slept the first uninterrupted sleep I had managed in a while. My phone began ringing at 6:18 a.m. on Thursday, November 12th. My father's name on the screen. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. "What did you do?" Not a question. The voice of a man who has already decided. "Good morning," I said. "A social worker. At your brother's apartment." With questions. Each sentence its own small accusation. "Do you know anything about that?" "Yes," I said. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I had heard from my father before. Raymond Voss is not a silent man. He is a man of declarative sentences and immediate responses, and the forward momentum of someone who has never had to wait very long for the world to arrange itself according to his expectations. This silence was the sound of that forward momentum meeting something it had not anticipated. "You called them on your own brother." "I reported concerns about my nephew," I said. What came after that lasted approximately 4.5 minutes and covered, in varying registers of volume and intensity, the following: that I had betrayed my family, that I had gone behind their backs, that Declan was struggling and this was not the answer, that Marcus needed stability and I had just destroyed whatever stability he had, that children do not benefit from government interference, that I could have come to my father with my concerns and he would have handled it, that I was being vindictive because I had not wanted to take Marcus in, that what I had done was the kind of thing you did not come back from, and that he was deeply disappointed in me in a way that he could not fully express. I held the phone and looked out the window at the November morning, which was beginning to show a thin line of pale light along the horizon. When my father finished, I said, "Marcus was alone in that apartment for 47 minutes in September. Declan was at a bar. I have the documentation." The second silence was different from the first. The first had been the silence of recalculation. This one was the silence of a man encountering a fact he had not possessed and did not know what to do with. "I didn't know that," my father said. "I know you didn't," I said. "I'm going to make coffee now." I hung up. Over the following 11 days, my phone received 41 missed calls. 16 from my father, across 4 separate stretches of calling. 14 from Declan, which were harder to ignore, because some of them were the kind of calls that are actually asking for something real, and I had to keep reminding myself that being asked for something real did not mean the answer was mine to provide alone. 9 from my mother. 2 from my Aunt Lorraine, who lives in Tucson and had apparently been briefed on the situation via the family group chat, which I had quietly muted on the morning of November 12th. I listened to every voicemail. My father's moved, over the course of 11 days, from anger, through something that sounded like injury, and then, by the 6th one, left on a Tuesday evening at 8:34 p.m., into something quieter and less certain. He said he wanted to understand what I had been seeing. He said he had spoken to Declan, and there were things Declan had not told him. He did not apologize, but he no longer sounded like a man delivering a verdict. Declan's voicemails were the hardest. Not because they were angry, they were not, mostly, but because they were genuine in a way that genuine things always are, which is to say complicated. He was scared. He did not want to lose Marcus. He was ashamed. He said, in one message left at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday, that he knew he had been failing, and that he had not known how to ask for help in a way that didn't feel like losing. I played that one 3 times. My mother called on 4 separate mornings. She did not argue. She said she was scared and that she missed me, and that she was worried about what was happening. On her 3rd call, the one she left on a Saturday at 9:15 in the morning, she said, "I know you love him, Petra. I know that is why you did it." I played that one more than 3 times. Gloria Tran conducted 2 follow-up visits to Declan's apartment in the weeks following the initial welfare check. She was, from what Andrea relayed to me, thorough and practical and not unkind. The formal assessment was completed on December 3rd. It identified the household as requiring a structured support plan, not emergency removal, because Declan was cooperative and Marcus was not in immediate acute danger, but a plan with real conditions attached to it. Mandatory caseworker visits on a monthly schedule, parenting classes beginning in January, a documented emergency care arrangement naming a specific adult who could take Marcus if Declan was unable. Andrea called me on December 4th at 3:07 p.m. I was at my desk. The afternoon light was doing something different from November. It had some color in it, a pale winter gold that lasted about 20 minutes before the sky went dark. "They want to name you as the kinship contact," she said. "First right of placement if the support plan conditions aren't met. Legal standing to make medical decisions if there's an emergency. You are not Marcus's primary caregiver. You are the person the system calls first." "What does that require from me?" I said. "Your signature on some forms. A background check, which, given your clean record, will not be an issue. And your willingness to be reachable." "That's it." "That's it," she said. "You don't quit your job. You don't move. You are simply the named adult who is standing." We completed the paperwork on December 9th, a Wednesday, at Andrea's office. I signed 3 documents. The background check cleared on December 16th. I am now, formally and legally, Marcus's kinship contact, not his mother, not his primary caregiver, but the person with a document attached to her name and a defined role within a process that exists outside of Sunday afternoon announcements in my parents' living room. Declan called me on December 21st. It was 7:44 p.m. I was folding laundry, towels, the mundane particular of it, and I looked at his name on my screen and I answered. He did not apologize exactly. He said he had been thinking about it for weeks. He said the caseworker visits had been hard, but that they had made him name things he had not been naming. He said his therapist, he had started seeing someone in early December, one of the voluntary steps he had taken before the mandatory parenting classes began, had said something about the difference between being in pain and performing being in pain, and he was still thinking about what that meant. He said Marcus had asked about me twice in the last week. He said Marcus missed me. He said, "I need help, Petra. I've needed it for a long time, and I didn't know how to say it in a way that didn't feel like losing." I said, "I know. You said that in a voicemail." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Dad says you ruined everything," he said. "I know he does." "Did you?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about Marcus on the kitchen floor watching the construction equipment video, entirely at ease, entirely trusting that the world around him was managed by adults who were paying attention. I thought about the button. "I made it real," I said. There's a difference between ruining something and making it real. The problems were already there. I just stopped pretending they weren't. Declan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Okay." My father and I did not speak for 47 days. He came to my building on January 4th, a Sunday, 10:30 in the morning, and rang from the lobby, and I came downstairs and we stood in the entryway next to the mailboxes in the particular fluorescent light of building lobbies everywhere, and he looked older than the last time I had seen him. Not dramatically. Just the specific aging that happens to people when something has displaced a belief they held for a long time. He said that he had spoken to Gloria, trans supervisor, which was the kind of thing my father would do, not to interfere, but to understand the process on his own terms. He said that he had not known about September. He said that he had not been paying the kind of attention to Declan and Marcus that he should have been, and that he had, instead, identified me as the solution to a problem he had not fully examined. He said he was sorry for calling me heartless. He said it the way a man says something that costs him. "I know," I said. "Thank you." He looked at the mailboxes for a moment. Then, "Your brother is going to need a lot of help." "I'm his kinship contact," I said. "I'm the one who gets called. I'm not going anywhere." He put his hand briefly on my shoulder before he left, and I think that was its own kind of sentence. Some doors close themselves. You only have to stop holding them open. I had been holding a door open for a long time. The door to the version of my family where I absorbed what needed absorbing and adjusted what needed adjusting, and made the difficult situations workable by placing myself in the middle of them. That door had been held open by my willingness, which my family had never examined and had eventually stopped distinguishing from simply the way things were. I closed it. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. I closed it by making one phone call and signing 3 documents and refusing to answer 41 calls across 11 days. Declan completed his first parenting class on January 7th, a Wednesday morning, which I know because he texted me afterward. First one done. Harder than I thought. Marcus made me a card. Gloria Tran's January visit filed a satisfactory progress note. Marcus is in preschool 4 days a week. He still has Clive the stuffed elephant, who has by now lost one eye and a significant portion of his original stuffing and has been surgically repaired with what appears to be blue yarn and determination. I visited on January 15th, a Saturday. Declan made sandwiches, actual sandwiches with a good bread, not just whatever was in the cabinet, and we sat at his kitchen table and ate them, and Marcus showed me a drawing of a dog he had named Professor, which was not a dog they had or were getting, but which Marcus had apparently decided, through the medium of visual art, to will into existence. I looked at the drawing for a long time. I asked if I could keep it. Marcus considered this gravely, and then said yes, but that I had to put it somewhere important. I told him I had the perfect spot. It is on my refrigerator now, next to Gerald, held up with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Professor the dog, rendered in green crayon on white paper, impossibly earnest. There is something worth knowing in the space between love and compliance. Love says, "I see this child and I will do what actually protects him, even when that means calling a number I hoped I would never have to call, even when it means 41 missed calls and 47 days of silence and a voicemail from an aunt in Tucson, I have always found a little exhausting." Compliance says, "I will do what is expected of me because the cost of refusing is higher than the cost of yes." I had been confusing those two things for a long time. Families teach you to confuse them, sometimes, because the confusion is convenient for everyone except the person doing the complying. I know the difference now. It is not a comfortable thing to know. But it is mine. If you were in Petra's position, sitting in that living room while your father announced your life was being reassigned, holding a nephew who had just handed you a button off your own cardigan, would you have driven home and made the call? Or would you have said yes at that table and found a way to carry it alone?